The rain started at 6:30. I know because I was standing at the kitchen window watching the first drops trace lazy lines down the glass when the clock on the microwave blinked from 6:29 to 6:30. In another life, I might have found it poetic, the way the droplets caught the amber glow from the streetlight below, how they seemed to move with no urgency at all. But poetry required feeling, and feeling was something I'd been rationing lately. I turned away from the window and surveyed my apartment, 3C in a building that had seen better decades. The walls were the color of old coffee, and the hardwood floors creaked in all the predictable places. I'd been here 3 months now, long enough to learn which floorboard by the bathroom door would betray you if you stepped on it wrong, but not long enough to call it home. I wasn't sure I wanted to call anywhere home anymore. The kettle sat on the stove, still warm from the tea I'd made an hour earlier. I'd developed a routine since moving here. Tea at 5:30, dinner at 7, shower at 9, bed by 10:30. Routines were lifelines, I'd learned. They kept you moving forward when forward felt impossible. I picked up the mug from the counter and carried it to the small dining table that doubled as my desk, my craft station, my everything. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle sprawled across its surface. A photograph of some European countryside, all rolling hills and impossibly blue skies. I'd started it the week I moved in, thinking it might give my hands something to do while my mind processed everything that had brought me here. 3 months later, I was maybe 60% done. The sky pieces mocked me with their sameness. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle patter of rain against the windows and the low hum of the refrigerator. I'd grown used to the silence. Before, silence had felt oppressive, something to fill with music or television or phone calls. Now it felt like a blanket I could pull over myself, soft and protective. I picked up a puzzle piece, part of a stone cottage by the look of it, and turned it slowly in my fingers. The edges were worn smooth from handling. I'd picked up the same piece dozens of times, always convinced this would be the moment it clicked into place, always wrong. The knock came at 7:14. I know the exact time because I was reaching for my phone to check the weather when the sound cut through the apartment like a record scratch. 3 soft raps, polite but persistent. I froze, puzzle piece still pinched between my thumb and forefinger. Nobody knocked on my door. The mail carrier left packages in the lobby. The super had my number if something needed fixing. My upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was too elderly to venture down 2 flights of stairs for casual visits. And I hadn't made the kind of friends who drop by unannounced. Hadn't made any friends at all, really. 3 more knocks, softer this time, almost apologetic. I set down the puzzle piece and walked to the door, my socked feet silent on the hardwood. Through the peephole, I could see a figure in the dim hallway light, tall, lean, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pushed back. Rain had dampened his hair, making it stick to his forehead in small, dark curls. He held a brown paper bag in one hand, the kind restaurants use for takeout. He was looking at the number on my door with a furrowed brow, like he was working out a math problem that didn't quite add up. I'd lived alone long enough to know the smart thing would be to leave the chain on, crack the door just enough to ask what he wanted. But something about his posture, the way he stood with his shoulders slightly hunched, patient rather than aggressive, made me turn the deadbolt instead. When I opened the door, he looked up with the eyes the color of storm clouds. Not gray exactly, but something deeper, more complicated. He took a small step back, a reflexive politeness. "Hey," he said, and his voice was softer than I'd expected. "Sorry to bother you, but wait." He glanced at the brass numbers on my door again, then back at me. "This isn't 3B, is it?" "No, I said. "This is 3C. 3B isn't across the hall." His face fell, not dramatically, but in the way of someone whose evening plans had just shifted slightly off course. "Shit, sorry. Sorry for swearing and sorry for bothering you, I thought." He held up the takeout bag. "I was supposed to meet someone, and they gave me the apartment number, but I guess I misheard or—" He trailed off, looking at the door across from mine, 3B. The apartment that had been empty since I'd moved in, judging by the pile of unclaimed mail I'd seen the super collecting from its door slot last week. "I don't think anyone lives there," I said, surprising myself by speaking up. "I've never seen anyone come or go." His shoulders sagged a little more. Of course they don't." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "Well, that's embarrassing. I'm Eli, by the way. Eli with the wrong apartment number, apparently." "Marcus," I said, because it seemed like the right thing to do. He smiled then, and it transformed his whole face. Not a polite stranger smile, but something warmer, more genuine. Nice to meet you, Marcus, even under these ridiculous circumstances. The rain had picked up while we'd been talking, drumming harder against the hall window at the end of the corridor. Eli's hoodie was already damp across the shoulders, and I could see droplets clinging to his hair where the hood had failed to protect him. "You're getting soaked," I said. "Yeah, I probably should have checked the forecast before I left." He glanced toward the stairs. "I should let you get back to your evening. Sorry again for the mix-up." He was already taking a step toward the stairwell when something inside me shifted. Not a decision exactly, but more like a door opening in a room I hadn't entered in months. "You can come in if you want," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could examine them too closely. "Just to get out of the rain for a minute?" He stopped, one foot raised toward the next step, and looked back at me. "That's really nice of you, but I don't want to impose. It's not an imposition." And as I said it, I realized it was true. The silence in my apartment had been comfortable, but this felt like something else entirely. Not uncomfortable, but different. Like the first warm day after a long winter when you suddenly remember what sunshine feels like on your skin. Eli studied my face for a moment, and I had the strange sensation that he was seeing something there I wasn't entirely aware of myself. "Okay," he said finally. "Just for a minute." I stepped back to let him in, and he crossed the threshold into my carefully ordered world. He was taller than he'd seemed in the doorway, with broad shoulders that filled out his hoodie in a way that made me quickly look elsewhere. His sneakers squeaked slightly against the hardwood, leaving small, wet prints that would dry in a few minutes and disappear entirely. "This is nice," he said, looking around the apartment. His gaze moved from the kitchen with its single-place setting drying by the sink to the living room with its second-hand couch and carefully arranged throw pillows, to the dining table with its sprawling puzzle. "Feels peaceful. That's one word for it." I closed the door behind him, suddenly aware of how quiet the space was with another person in it. "Can I get you something? Coffee, tea, water?" "Tea sounds great, actually, if it's not too much trouble." "It's not." I moved toward the kitchen, grateful for something to do with my hands. "What kind do you like?" "Whatever you've got is fine. I'm not picky." I put the kettle back on the stove and pulled another mug from the cabinet. White ceramic, plain, part of a set I'd bought at Target in those first desperate days when I'd needed to fill the apartment with things that looked like a life. While the water heated, I found myself stealing glances at Eli, who had gravitated toward the puzzle table. "European countryside?" he asked, picking up the piece I'd abandoned earlier. "Yeah, found it at a thrift store. Seemed like the kind of thing a person should have in their apartment." I realized how that sounded and added, seemed relaxing. He turned the piece over in his palm, examining the fragment of stone cottage. "You don't seem like someone who leaves things half-finished." The observation caught me off guard. "You'd be surprised." "Would I?" He set the piece down carefully in almost the exact spot where I'd left it. "What else have you left half-finished?" It was a casual question, the kind strangers ask when they're filling space with conversation, but something about the way he asked it, genuinely curious rather than politely interested, made my chest tighten. "Books," I said, which was true but safe. "Started learning guitar once, had a garden." I turned back to the stove where the kettle was beginning to whisper. "You? Oh, I'm a chronic half-finisher. Started a master's degree twice, never finished either one. Bought a bicycle last year to get in shape. It's been hanging in my storage unit for 8 months. Started writing a novel in college." He laughed, a sound with just enough self-deprecation to make it charming rather than bitter. Though, to be fair, the novel was terrible. The world is probably better off without it. The kettle reached a full boil, and I poured water into both mugs, dropping tea bags into each. "Earl Grey?" Because it was what I had, and because it seemed like the kind of tea you offer to unexpected strangers on rainy nights. I brought the mugs to the table, setting one in front of Eli and keeping the other for myself. "Thanks," he said, wrapping his hands around the ceramic. His fingers were long, with calluses on the tips that suggested guitar playing, or rock climbing, or some other activity that required grip and patience. "This is perfect." We sat across from each other at the small table, the unfinished puzzle sprawled between us like a conversation we hadn't started yet. Eli blew gently on his tea, sending wisps of steam curling upward in the warm light from the overhead fixture. So, he said after a moment, are you going to ask about my failed dinner date? Or are we going to pretend I knocked on the wrong door by accident? I looked up from my own mug, meeting his eyes across the table. There was something playful in his expression, but also something else, a kind of openness, that suggested he was genuinely curious about my answer. I wasn't going to ask, I said honestly. But now that you've brought it up, he grinned. Fair enough. It was supposed to be a first date, actually. Met the guy on Tinder, chatted for a few days, seemed normal enough. He suggested dinner at his place. Said he liked to cook. Eli shrugged, taking a small sip of his tea. I brought dessert. He gestured to the takeout bag he'd set on the counter. Tiramisu from that Italian place on 5th Street. Figured if the dinner was terrible, at least we'd have good dessert. That was thoughtful. Yeah, well, turns out it doesn't matter how thoughtful you are if the guy gives you the wrong apartment number. He paused, then added, or maybe it was the right apartment number and he just changed his mind. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. There was a beat of silence, not uncomfortable, but loaded with something I couldn't quite name. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. Have you tried calling him? I asked. Yeah, went straight to voicemail, which honestly is probably answer enough. Eli set down his mug and leaned back in his chair, not exactly heartbroken about it, if I'm being honest. The conversation wasn't exactly sparkling, and he seemed more interested in talking about his gym routine than anything else. So, why go at all? The question slipped out before I could stop it, more curious than I'd intended to sound. Eli tilted his head slightly, considering. That's a good question, he said slowly. I guess I keep thinking I should be trying, like there's this expectation that you're supposed to be putting yourself out there, meeting people, building connections. And most of the time I'm fine on my own, but sometimes the quiet gets a little too loud, and I think maybe I should be doing more. He picked up another puzzle piece, turning it absently in his fingers. What about you? Do you date? Sorry, that's probably too personal a question for someone I just met. It's fine, I said, though I could feel something tightening in my chest. And no, not really, not lately. By choice? I considered the question, really considered it. I'm not sure anymore. Maybe it started by choice, but now it just feels like the way things are. Eli nodded like he understood something about that, which surprised me. Most people, when you told them you weren't dating, wanted to fix it immediately, suggestions about apps or friends they could set you up with, or theories about what you were doing wrong. But Eli just nodded and took another sip of his tea. Sometimes the way things are is exactly the way they need to be, he said quietly. We fell into a comfortable silence then, both of us focusing on our tea and the puzzle pieces scattered across the table. I found myself studying Eli's profile as he examined a piece that looked like part of a tree. The strong line of his jaw, the way his damp hair had started to dry into loose waves, the concentrated expression he wore while trying to figure out where the piece belonged. He was attractive, obviously. The kind of attractive that would make him successful on dating apps, with apps' profile photos that probably showed him hiking or laughing with friends or doing something outdoorsy and appealing. But there was something else about him, something quieter and more substantial than mere attractiveness. The way he moved his hands when he talked, the way he listened with his whole attention, the way he'd accepted my invitation to come in without making it feel loaded with expectation. Can I ask you something? He said, still studying the puzzle piece. Sure. Why did you invite me in? I mean, I'm grateful you did, but you don't know me at all. For all you know, I could be some kind of serial killer who knocks on random doors looking for victims. I laughed, surprising myself. Are you a serial killer? No, but that's exactly what a serial killer would say. True, I guess I'll just have to trust that you're not planning to murder me over tea and puzzles. Your secret would be safe with me anyway, he said, finally setting down the puzzle piece. Who would believe that someone was killed during such an aggressively wholesome evening? He was right. This was possibly the most wholesome interaction I'd had with another human being in months. No agenda, no expectation, just two people sharing tea on a rainy night. When was the last time I'd done something like this? When was the last time someone had sat in my space and made it feel less empty rather than more crowded? You still didn't answer my question, Eli said gently. I set down my mug, wrapping my hands around it for the warmth. I don't know, I said honestly. You seemed, I don't know, safe, I guess. And maybe I was curious. Curious about what? About what would happen if I said yes instead of no for once. The words hung in the air between us, more honest than I'd intended to be. Eli looked at me across the table, and I had the strange feeling that he was seeing something I'd been trying to keep hidden, even from myself. "How's it going so far?" he asked quietly. "Better than expected," I admitted. Something shifted in his expression then, became more serious without losing its warmth. "Can I tell you something?" "Yeah." I wasn't lost. I mean, I was lost, but not the way I said. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The guy did give me his apartment number and I wrote it down correctly. But when I got to the building, I stood outside for like 10 minutes, trying to decide whether I actually wanted to go through with it. I waited for him to continue, sensing there was more. And then I came upstairs and stood in this hallway for another 5 minutes, looking at both doors, 3B and 3C. And I knew which one was the right one. But I also knew that as soon as I knocked, I'd be committed to an evening I wasn't sure I wanted." He met my eyes directly. "So I knocked on the wrong door on purpose." The confession settled between us like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything that had happened since he'd appeared in my doorway. "Why?" I asked. "Because sometimes the thing you're supposed to do isn't the thing you actually want to do. And sometimes you don't know what you want until you give yourself permission to choose something else. And what did you want?" He smiled, a little shy suddenly. "I wanted to see what would happen if I knocked on the wrong door. And I ended up having tea with a stranger who builds puzzles and makes me feel like it's okay to be exactly where I am instead of where I'm supposed to be." The words hit something deep in my chest, a place that had been locked up tight for months. I looked down at my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic, trying to process what he'd just said. "Marcus?" Eli's voice was soft. "Are you okay?" I looked up to find him watching me with concern, and I realized my breathing had changed, become shallower. "Yeah, I stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Too much honesty?" he asked gently. I have a habit of saying things I should probably keep to myself. "No, it's not that. It's just been a while since someone—" I trailed off again, frustrated by my inability to form a coherent thought. "Since someone what?" "Since someone made me feel like where I am is okay." The admission surprised me with its truth. Since moving here, I'd been existing in a kind of liminal space, not fully settled, but not fully transient either. People, the few people I talked to, kept asking about my plans, my next steps, what I was working toward, as if my current state was inherently temporary, a problem to be solved, rather than a place to inhabit. But Eli had been sitting in my apartment for over an hour now, and he hadn't asked about my job, or my plans, or why I lived alone in a studio apartment with furniture that looked like it had been chosen by someone who'd given up on the idea of permanence. He'd just accepted the space I'd created and made it feel like enough. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "where you are seems pretty good to me." We both reached for the tea at the same time, our hands colliding gently as we both went for my mug. His fingers brushed against mine, just skin against skin, warm and entirely innocent. But something electric shot up my arm at the contact. We both froze. His hand didn't pull away immediately, and neither did mine. For a moment, we just stayed there, fingers barely touching, both of us suddenly breathing a little too carefully. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips where they pressed against his knuckles. "Sorry," he said softly, but he still didn't move his hand. "It's okay," I whispered, and meant it. Finally, slowly, he pulled back, leaving my skin feeling oddly cold in the absence of his touch. I picked up my mug with hands that weren't entirely steady, grateful for something to do. "So," Eli said after a moment, his voice just slightly rougher than it had been before. "Tell me about this puzzle. What made you choose European countryside?" The change of subject felt like a gift, a way to step back from whatever had just passed between us without pretending it hadn't happened. Honestly, it was the only one at the thrift store that didn't have pieces missing. I gestured to the scattered fragments of image, though now I'm wondering if I should have gone with the lighthouse scene instead. At least that would have been finished by now. "What's wrong with taking your time?" "Nothing, I guess. It's just, I used to be someone who finished things. Projects, goals, commitments. And now I start something thinking, it'll take a week, and 3 months later, I'm still working on the same patch of sky." Eli picked up a piece from the table, part of a cloud, pale blue and white, and held it up to the light. "Maybe the point isn't finishing. Maybe the point is having something to do with your hands while your brain processes other stuff." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Processing?" "I think we're all processing something," he said simply. and I think puzzles are probably a pretty gentle way to do it. He was right, though I hadn't thought about it that way before. The puzzle had become a kind of meditation for me, a way to occupy the part of my mind that wanted to cycle through the same thoughts over and over. When I was focused on finding the right piece, looking for the pattern in the colors and shapes, the rest of my brain could rest. What are you processing? I asked. Right now, the fact that I'm sitting in a stranger's apartment having the most honest conversation I've had in months. He set the cloud piece down carefully, and the fact that I don't want to leave. My breath caught in my throat. Eli, I know. I know this is weird, and I know we just met, and I know I'm probably reading too much into everything. He looked at me directly, his storm gray eyes serious. But I feel more myself sitting here with you than I have anywhere else in a long time. I wanted to say something, but the words seemed to lodge somewhere between my chest and my throat. Because I knew exactly what he meant, and that scared me more than I was ready to admit. We'd moved to the couch at some point. I couldn't remember when exactly, but now we were sitting at opposite ends of my small sofa, legs tucked under us, facing each other in the warm light from the floor lamp. The rain had settled into a steady, gentle percussion against the windows, and the apartment felt smaller with both of us in it, but smaller in a good way. Intimate rather than cramped. Can I ask what brought you here? Eli said. To this apartment, this city? It was the question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. The question everyone asked eventually, and the one I'd never figured out how to answer without revealing more than I wanted to share. I needed a change, I said, which was true but incomplete. From what? I could have deflected, could have turned the question back to him, or made some joke about needing to escape the suburbs, or given him the sanitized version I'd perfected for landlords and neighbors. Instead, I found myself saying, from a life that stopped fitting. What do you mean? I pulled a throw pillow into my lap, something to hold on to while I tried to find the words. Have you ever had the experience of looking around at your life and realizing that somewhere along the way, it became someone else's life? Like you were so focused on doing the right things, making the right choices, being the person you were supposed to be, that you forgot to check whether any of it was actually what you wanted? Eli nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I know that feeling. I had a job that looked good on paper, in a city where I had friends and a routine and all the things you're supposed to want. And then something happened. I paused, not sure how much to share. Someone I cared about died, and suddenly all of those things that had seemed so important just weren't. They felt like costume pieces I'd been wearing for so long I'd forgotten they weren't actually my clothes. I'm sorry, Eli said quietly, about whoever you lost. Thank you. I pressed my face into the pillow for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of my own detergent. It wasn't sudden, the dying. We had time to say goodbye, which was a gift, I guess. But it was also time to realize how much of my life I'd been spending trying to be the person I thought I should be instead of the person I actually was. And who are you, actually? The question was asked so gently, with such genuine curiosity, that I didn't feel defensive about it the way I usually did. I don't know yet, I admitted. That's part of why I'm here, I think. Trying to figure out who I am when I'm not performing being someone else. And any discoveries so far? I looked around the apartment, at the half-finished puzzle, the single-place setting, the stack of books I'd been reading slowly and carefully, one page at a time. At Eli, sitting in my space like he belonged there, asking questions I hadn't known I wanted to be asked. I've discovered that I like being alone more than I thought I would, I said, and that silence isn't always empty, and that sometimes the best conversations happen with people you barely know. Why do you think that is? The thing about conversations with strangers? Less baggage, maybe. When someone doesn't know your history, you get to choose which parts of yourself to show them. You can be whoever you actually are in that moment, instead of whoever you've been in all the moments before. Eli was quiet for a long moment, considering this. That's both liberating and terrifying. Yeah. What parts of yourself are you choosing to show me? The question hung between us, loaded with possibility and risk. I could feel something shifting in the air, the conversation deepening in a way that felt both inevitable and fragile. The parts that don't perform, I said finally. The parts that build puzzles and drink too much tea and live in apartments that feel like waiting rooms. The parts that invite strangers in from the rain and don't regret it. I like those parts, Eli said softly. What parts are you showing me? The parts that knock on wrong doors on purpose. The parts that would rather have tea with a puzzle-building stranger than dinner with a Tinder date. The parts that— He paused, seeming to weigh his words. The parts that haven't felt this interested in another person in a very long time. My pulse stuttered. Eli. I know. I know this is fast, and I know we just met, and I know you probably didn't invite me in because you were looking for whatever this is. He ran a hand through his now dry hair, leaving small tufts standing up endearingly. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't feeling something here. I set the pillow aside and looked at him directly. What kind of something? The kind where I keep finding excuses not to check the time because I don't want this to end. The kind where everything you say makes me want to know more. The kind where I'm pretty sure I could sit on this couch and talk to you until the sun comes up and still not feel like we'd covered enough ground. He was right about the time. I had no idea how long we'd been sitting there. The rain outside had settled into the kind of steady rhythm that made the apartment feel like a ship in a gentle storm, sealed off from the world outside. Safe, contained. I should probably go, he said, but made no move to get up. Probably, I agreed, but I didn't want him to. My date is probably wondering where I am. Is he? Eli's phone was sitting on the coffee table between us, screen side down where he'd placed it earlier. He picked it up and flipped it over, squinting at the bright display. 3 missed calls, he said, and a text that just says, "Where are you?" He showed me the screen, and I caught a glimpse of the contact name. Ben, Tinder. You should probably call him back. Yeah. But instead of dialing, Eli set the phone back down on the coffee table. Or I could text him and tell him something came up. Did something come up? He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the question seriously. I think I was supposed to meet someone else tonight, he said finally, his voice quiet in the hushed space of the apartment. A beat of silence. The rain continued its gentle drumming against the windows. But I'm glad it was you instead. The words settled around us like dust motes in sunlight, visible and delicate and somehow transformative. I felt something in my chest unclench. Some part of me I'd been holding, carefully contained, suddenly expanding to fill more space. Marcus? Eli's voice was softer now, almost uncertain. Yeah? Would it be okay if I stayed a little longer? I looked at him sitting on my couch, hair still slightly mussed from the rain, eyes the color of storm clouds, holding his phone like it contained a different life than the one he was choosing in this moment. This man who had knocked on the wrong door and somehow found exactly the right place. Yes, I said, and meant it completely. I'd like that. Eli smiled then, the kind of smile that starts small and spreads across someone's face like sunrise, and set his phone back on the coffee table without looking at it again. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft and steady and infinite, sealing us into this moment like amber, preserving something precious and fragile and utterly unexpected. Neither of us moved to turn on the television or suggest we do something else. We just sat there in the warm light of the apartment, talking in voices that grew softer as the evening stretched on, as if we were afraid that speaking too loudly might break whatever spell had settled over us. And somewhere in that quietness, in the space between the words we said and the words we didn't say yet, something new began to take root, tentative and careful and full of possibility. The kind of beginning that happens not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with tea shared on a rainy night and the simple, radical act of letting a stranger become something more. Part 2. I woke to the sound of someone moving carefully in my kitchen. For a moment, I lay still in the gray morning light, trying to place the soft sounds. A cabinet closing, water running, the gentle clink of ceramic. Then memory rushed back. Eli on my couch, the rain outside, conversations that had stretched long past midnight until we'd both finally acknowledged that one of us should probably get some sleep. You can take the bed, I'd offered, but he'd shaken his head. Couch is perfect, he'd said, and I'd brought him a pillow and my spare blanket, the soft blue one I kept folded at the foot of my bed for nights when the apartment felt too cold. Now sunlight was filtering through the living room windows, and I could hear him moving around like he belonged there, like this was something we'd done before, instead of something that had never happened to me in my life. I'd forgotten what it felt like to make tea for someone else. The thought came unbidden as I padded to the bathroom, running a hand through my sleep-mussed hair. How long had it been since I'd woken up and automatically thought about whether there was enough coffee for two or whether I should put out an extra mug? Years, maybe. Long enough that the consideration felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like muscle memory I'd thought I'd lost. When I emerged from the bathroom, Eli was standing at the stove, my kettle in one hand and a questioning look on his face. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the burner he'd already turned on. "I'm kind of useless without caffeine in the morning, and I wasn't sure if you preferred coffee or tea, so I went with tea since that's what we had last night." His hair was sticking up in small tufts where he'd slept on it, and the blanket had left a crease along his left cheek. He looked soft and rumpled and entirely too comfortable in my kitchen, like he'd been making morning tea there for months instead of hours. "Tea's perfect," I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in weeks, actually. Your couch is really comfortable." He paused, seeming to consider something. Or maybe it was just, I don't know, the quiet, I guess. Sometimes other people's spaces feel more restful than your own. I knew exactly what he meant. There was something about being in an unfamiliar place that could quiet the mental noise that accumulated in your own four walls. All the half-finished projects and unmade decisions and small anxieties that clung to familiar spaces like dust. "I'm glad," I said, and meant it. We moved around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that should have been awkward, but wasn't. Eli found mugs without asking where they were kept, and I pulled milk from the refrigerator and honey from the cabinet, and somehow we managed the small choreography of morning tea preparation without bumping into each other or stepping on each other's toes. "So," Eli said once we were both settled at the table with steaming mugs, the half-finished puzzle still sprawled between us in the morning light, "did your Tinder date ever text you back?" I looked at him over my tea, trying to parse the question before realizing he was making a joke. "I think you're confused about who had the Tinder date." "Right, sorry, still waking up." He grinned, looking not sorry at all. "Did my Tinder date ever text me back is what I meant to ask." "Did he?" Eli glanced toward his phone, which was still sitting screen down on the coffee table where he'd left it the night before. "Probably, but I haven't checked." "Are you going to?" "Eventually, I guess. To apologize, if nothing else. It's pretty shitty to just disappear on someone without explanation." He took a sip of his tea, considering, though I'm not sure how to explain what actually happened. What did happen? The question hung in the air between us, heavier than it should have been, because we both knew that what had happened was more than a wrong apartment number, more than a stranger seeking shelter from the rain. But neither of us had named it yet, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready to. "I knocked on the wrong door," Eli said finally, "and you let me in. That's it? That's everything." He looked at me directly, his gray eyes serious in the morning light. Sometimes everything is that simple. We finished breakfast, toast and tea and comfortable silences punctuated by observations about the puzzle or comments about the weather. And then Eli started gathering his things. The takeout bag from the night before, his phone, the hoodie that had dried draped over the back of my kitchen chair. I expected him to leave. Expected the spell of the previous evening to break in the practical light of morning, the way these things usually did. Expected to feel the familiar relief-tinged disappointment of my space returning to its customary solitude. Instead, Eli paused by the sink, looking at the few dishes we'd accumulated. "Can I help clean up?" he asked. "Feels weird to just leave you with the mess." "It's not a mess," I said, because it wasn't. Just 2 mugs and a couple of plates. Hardly worth mentioning. Still. So we washed dishes together, Eli rinsing while I dried. And somehow that simple domestic task stretched into another hour of conversation. About his job, graphic design for a small marketing firm, and my job, freelance copy editing that let me work from home. About the neighborhood, which he was still learning since he'd only moved here 6 months ago. About the strange intimacy of doing ordinary tasks with someone you barely knew. "I should probably head out," he said eventually, but made no move toward the door. "Probably," I agreed, but I didn't want him to go. "Want to walk somewhere? Get some air?" The suggestion surprised me. I'd been expecting him to leave, had been prepared for the gentle awkwardness of morning after not quite anything, the polite exchange of numbers and vague promises to stay in touch that usually preceded people disappearing from your life as quickly as they'd entered it. "Where?" I asked. "I don't know. Wherever you go when you want to get out of the apartment." I considered this. Where did I go? In 3 months of living here, I'd established a small circuit of necessary places: the grocery store, the library, the coffee shop 2 blocks over that stayed open late and didn't mind if you sat for hours with a single cup and a book. But I couldn't remember the last time I'd walked anywhere, just for the sake of walking, just to move through the world with no particular destination in mind. "There's a cafe," I said. About 4 blocks from here. Good coffee, terrible music, but they have these enormous windows that are nice for people watching. Sounds perfect. So we left the apartment together, Eli waiting while I locked the door, both of us automatically heading toward the stairs without discussion. Outside, the air was clean and cool, washed bright by the previous night's rain. The sidewalks were still damp in places, and the trees lining the street looked greener than they had the day before, like everything had been given a fresh start. We walked without talking much, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Eli had a loose, easy stride that somehow matched mine perfectly despite our different heights, and I found myself noticing the way he moved through the world, present but not rushed, observant without being intrusive. When we passed a small dog being walked by an elderly woman, he smiled and nodded at both of them. When we had to navigate around construction scaffolding, he gestured for me to go first with a small, old-fashioned courtesy that felt natural rather than performed. I caught myself glancing at him as we walked, studying his profile, when he was distracted by something interesting in a shop window, or paused to read a flyer taped to a telephone pole. There was something compelling about the way he occupied space, confident but not aggressive, comfortable in his own skin in a way that made me want to stand a little closer. Which I did, I realized. Without consciously deciding to, I'd started walking near enough that our shoulders occasionally brushed, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of whatever soap he used, something clean and uncomplicated. "You're a close walker," Eli observed, but he didn't sound like he minded. "Sorry, I can—" "No, I like it. Most people maintain this invisible bubble of personal space, even when they're walking with someone they know well. But you walk like we're actually together instead of just heading in the same direction." I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I didn't. But I didn't move away either. The cafe was exactly as I described it. Good coffee, questionable music, enormous windows that turned the whole front wall into a gallery for watching the street life outside. We ordered our drinks and found a small table near the window, settling into the kind of comfortable observation that felt like a continuation of the morning's ease. "So," Eli said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug, "what's your story with this neighborhood? You said you've been here 3 months. What made you choose this particular corner of the world?" Honestly, it was the first place I looked at that felt anonymous enough. I stirred my coffee absently, considering how much to share. When I decided to move, I wanted somewhere that wouldn't have too many expectations. Somewhere I could just exist without having to explain myself to anyone. Mission accomplished? Mostly. My neighbors are polite but not intrusive. The building super doesn't make small talk. And I can go days without having a conversation longer than "thank you" and "have a good day." I paused. Present company accepted, obviously. Obviously. Eli smiled. "And is that what you wanted? The minimal human contact?" It was a fair question, and I found myself really thinking about it instead of giving the automatic answer I'd been offering people for months. "I thought it was," I said finally. "I thought I needed space to figure out who I was without all the noise of other people's opinions and expectations and needs. And I think I did need that for a while. But lately I've been wondering if there's a difference between taking space and hiding. What kind of difference? Taking space is temporary. It's gathering yourself so you can engage with the world from a better place. Hiding is— I trailed off, looking out the window at the people passing by. Hiding is what you do when you're afraid that if you let people see who you really are, they won't like what they find. And which one do you think you've been doing? Both, maybe, and started as taking space, turned into hiding somewhere along the way." Eli nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. I've been doing some version of hiding myself lately, I think. Not from the world exactly, but from— I don't know. From having to make real choices about what I want, instead of just going through the motions of what seems like I should want. Like Tinder dates with guys you're not actually interested in." Exactly like that. He laughed, but there was something rueful in it. It's easier to show up for something you don't really care about than it is to risk showing up for something you do care about and having it not work out. "So what do you care about?" The question slipped out before I could consider whether it was too personal, too direct for whatever this was between us. But Eli didn't seem to mind being asked. "That's the problem," he said. "I've been playing it so safe for so long that I've lost track of the difference between what I want and what I think I'm supposed to want. Like, I know I'm supposed to want a relationship, and I know I'm supposed to be actively pursuing that, and I know I'm supposed to be excited about meeting new people and going on dates and all of that. But mostly I just feel exhausted by the whole thing. Because it doesn't feel real? Because it feels like performance. Like I'm playing a role in someone else's idea of what my life should look like, instead of actually living my own life. I knew that feeling intimately, the particular exhaustion that came from spending so much energy being who you thought you were supposed to be that you forgot to check whether that person bore any resemblance to who you actually were. So, what would your own life look like? I asked. Eli was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the street beyond. When he spoke, his voice was softer than it had been. I think it would be slower, he said. Less about checking boxes and more about paying attention to what actually feels good. Less about meeting the right person and more about becoming the kind of person who could recognize the right person when they showed up. And what would that person look like? The right person? I don't know if it's about looks, he said, then caught himself. Sorry, that's not what you meant, is it? No, but I like that answer anyway. I guess someone who didn't make me feel like I had to be anyone other than exactly who I am. Someone I could sit with in comfortable silence or have the kind of conversation that makes you lose track of time. Someone who, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Someone who felt like coming home instead of going on an adventure. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition so sharp it was almost physical. That's a good answer, I said quietly. What about you? What would your own life look like? I considered the question, surprised to realize I actually had an answer. I think it would involve more mornings like this one, I said. Making tea for someone else, having conversations that matter, walking places with no particular agenda except being present for whatever happens. More mornings like this one, Eli repeated as if he were testing how the words felt. Yeah. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, both of us watching the world outside the window. A woman with a stroller paused to let an elderly man with a walker cross in front of her. A group of teenagers shared earbuds, heads bobbing to music we couldn't hear. Two business people walked by deep in conversation, gesturing emphatically about something that seemed to matter enormously to both of them. You ever think maybe we're not lost? Eli asked suddenly. Just waiting to meet the wrong people? I looked at him, trying to parse the question. What do you mean? I mean, what if all this time we've been thinking we need to figure ourselves out before we can connect with someone else? When maybe the real problem is that we've been trying to connect with people who want us to be someone we're not. Is that what this is? I asked. Meeting the wrong people? Eli smiled, but there was something almost shy in his expression. No, but I'm not in a hurry to correct it. The words settled around us like sunlight through the cafe windows, warm and illuminating and full of possibility. I felt something in my chest expand, some careful knot of self-protection beginning to loosen. We should probably head back, I said eventually, though I made no move to get up. Probably, Eli agreed, but he didn't move either. Finally, reluctantly, we gathered our things and made our way back onto the street. The walk home, and when had I started thinking of it as home instead of just my apartment, was even more comfortable than the walk to the cafe had been. We'd settled into an easy rhythm, close enough that our arms brushed occasionally, far enough apart that it felt chosen rather than accidental. Can I ask you something? Eli said as we turned onto my block. Sure. Last night, when you invited me in, did you have any idea this would happen? This? This? He gestured between us, a small motion that somehow encompassed the morning tea, the shared dishes, the walk to the cafe, the conversation that had meandered through a territory I rarely explored even with myself. Whatever this is, I thought about it honestly. No, I didn't expect anything to happen. I saw you standing there, and something about you made me want to say yes instead of no for once. And now I'm glad I did. We'd reached my building, and Eli stopped walking, turning to face me on the sidewalk. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Not uncertainty exactly, but a kind of careful attention, like he was trying to memorize something important. I should probably go home, he said. Shower, change clothes, check on the real world. Probably, but I don't want to. The confession was so simple, so honest, that it took my breath away. Because I didn't want him to leave either, and I hadn't let myself fully acknowledge that until he'd said it out loud. What do you want? I asked. I want to spend the day with you. I want to help you work on that puzzle, or read while you read, or Just exist in the same space without having to justify why or explain what it means. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving small tufts standing up, which is probably crazy considering we barely know each other. Is it crazy? Maybe. But it's also the most honest thing I've wanted in months. We stood there on the sidewalk outside my building, looking at each other in the late morning light. I could feel something building between us. Not sexual tension exactly, but something deeper and more complex. The recognition that whatever was happening here mattered in a way that neither of us had expected or planned for. Come back up, I said, if you want to. Are you sure? No, I admitted, but I'm not sorry I asked. Eli's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire expression, soft and genuine, and somehow relieved, like he'd been holding his breath without realizing it. Okay, he said. Yes, I'd like that. So we went back upstairs, back to my apartment that was starting to feel different with him in it. Warmer somehow, more alive. Eli settled back onto the couch like he belonged there, and I made more tea because it gave me something to do with my hands. And somehow the afternoon unfolded around us like a lazy river, unhurried and natural. We worked on the puzzle together for a while. Eli surprisingly good at seeing patterns I'd missed, finding pieces that connected sections I'd been struggling with for weeks. We talked about books. He was reading a mystery novel I'd never heard of. I was slowly making my way through a collection of essays about solitude. We listened to music, Eli scrolling through a playlist on his phone until he found something we both liked, something quiet and atmospheric that filled the apartment without overwhelming it. This is nice, he said at one point, looking up from a particularly stubborn section of sky. What is? This. Not having to be anywhere else, not having to perform being social or interesting or available. Just being here. I knew exactly what he meant. There was something almost radical about spending time with someone without agenda, without the underlying current of evaluation that seemed to run through most social interactions. No one was trying to impress anyone. No one was performing attraction or compatibility or future potential. We were just two people sharing space and finding that we liked it. The afternoon dissolved into evening without either of us particularly noticing. I made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and a simple sauce. But Eli helped without being asked, chopping vegetables and stirring things when I needed to step away. We ate at the small table, the puzzle pushed to one side to make room for plates and glasses of water. I should call Ben, Eli said eventually, glancing toward his phone. The Tinder guy. I owe him an explanation. What are you going to tell him? The truth, I guess. That something came up. Did something come up? Eli looked at me across the table, his expression serious. Yeah, something did. He made the call from the kitchen, keeping his voice low but not so low that I couldn't hear the general tone of the conversation. Apologetic, but not overly so. Brief, professional. When he hung up and returned to the table, he looked lighter somehow, like he'd set down something he'd been carrying. How did he take it? Better than I expected, honestly. I think he was kind of relieved. Apparently, he'd been having second thoughts too, but didn't know how to back out politely. Eli smiled ruefully. We probably would have spent the whole evening being polite to each other and pretending we were having a good time. And instead I'm here, having the kind of evening I actually want to have. As the light outside began to fade, we moved to the living room, Eli on one end of the couch and me on the other, both of us comfortable in the growing dusk. The music was still playing softly from his phone, something instrumental and contemplative that seemed to match the mood that had settled over us. Can I ask you something personal? Eli said. Haven't you been asking me personal things all day? Fair point. Can I ask you something more personal? Sure. When was the last time you felt like yourself? Really yourself, not the version of yourself you thought you were supposed to be. The question caught me off guard with its specificity. Not when was the last time you were happy, or when did you last feel good about your life, but when did you last feel like yourself? Honestly, right now, I said, surprising myself with the answer. Today, with you. I feel more like myself than I have in maybe years. What does that feel like? I considered the question, trying to put words to something I hadn't fully acknowledged until he'd asked. Like I don't have to edit myself, I said finally. Like I can say what I'm actually thinking instead of what I think you want to hear. Like I can be quiet when I feel like being quiet, or talk when I have something to say without worrying about whether I'm being interesting enough or engaging enough or whatever enough. That sounds exhausting the other way. It is. I didn't realize how exhausting until I stopped doing it. When did you stop? Last night, I think. When I invited you in. It was the first spontaneous thing I'd done in months, and it felt like remembering something I'd forgotten about myself. Eli was quiet for a moment, processing this. What did you remember? That I'm not as careful as I thought I was, that some risks are worth taking even when you don't know what you're risking them for. And what are you risking this for? The question hung between us, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Because we both knew that whatever was happening here had moved beyond casual acquaintance, beyond the simple kindness of shelter from a storm. We were risking something: comfort, safety, the careful solitude we'd both built around ourselves, but for what exactly? I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I want to find out. Eli shifted on the couch, turning to face me more directly. In the growing darkness of the apartment, I could barely make out his features, but I could feel his attention like warmth. Marcus, he said softly. Yeah? I'm scared I'm going to mess this up. How would you mess it up? By wanting too much too fast. By reading more into this than is actually there. By... He stopped, seeming to search for words. By falling for someone I barely know. My breath caught in my throat. Are you falling? I think I started falling the moment you said I could come in. The confession hung in the air between us, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. I could feel my heart beating faster, could feel something shifting in my chest, some careful wall beginning to crumble. Eli, I said, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. I know it's too fast, and I know we barely know each other, and I know this probably isn't... Stop, I said gently. You don't know what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? I looked at him in the dim light of the apartment, this man who had knocked on the wrong door and somehow found exactly the right place, who had spent a day and a half in my space and made it feel like home in a way it never had before. I'm thinking that maybe falling isn't something you can control the timing of, I said. Maybe it just happens when it happens, and you can either fight it or trust it. Which are you doing? I'm trying to trust it. Something in his expression changed, became softer and more open. Really? Really? The music shifted to something even quieter, a slow guitar melody that seemed to encourage whispered conversations and gentle truths. We sat there in the growing darkness, neither of us moving to turn on a light, both of us content to exist in the soft gray space between day and night. Come here, Eli said softly. I looked at him questioningly, and he patted the couch beside him, an invitation rather than a demand. I hesitated for just a moment, not because I didn't want to, but because I could feel that this was a threshold, a line we hadn't crossed yet. And then I moved to sit beside him, close enough that our thighs touched, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body. Is this okay? He asked. Yeah. We sat like that for a while, not talking, just listening to the music and breathing the same air. I was acutely aware of every point where our bodies touched. His leg against mine, his shoulder brushing my shoulder when he moved, the careful way he'd positioned his arm along the back of the couch so it was close to my shoulders but not quite touching. Marcus? His voice was barely above a whisper. Hmm? Can I... He stopped, seeming to reconsider. Never mind. What? I was going to ask if I could hold your hand, but that sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. It doesn't sound ridiculous. No, no. So he reached for my hand, his fingers finding mine in the darkness, and suddenly something that had been carefully held in check between us shifted and settled into place. His hand was warm and slightly rough, with long fingers that interlaced with mine like they'd been designed for exactly this purpose. This is nice, he said softly. Yeah. We stayed like that as the evening deepened around us, hands linked, not talking much but not needing to. There was something profound about the simple intimacy of it. Not sexual, not yet, but deeply connecting. Like we were sharing something essential about ourselves, through the simple contact of skin against skin. I should probably go home, Eli said eventually, but his fingers tightened slightly around mine, like his body was disagreeing with his words. Probably. I don't want to. I don't want you to either. But if I stay much longer, I'm going to want to kiss you. The words hit me like a physical shock, not because they surprised me, but because they named something I'd been carefully not acknowledging all day. The way I'd been watching his mouth when he talked, the way I'd found excuses to stand close to him in the kitchen, the way my pulse quickened every time our hands brushed. Would that be so terrible? I asked quietly. No, but I want to do this right. What does right look like? He turned toward me, and in the dim light, I could see his expression, serious and tender, and full of something I was afraid to name. Right looks like taking time to know each other. Right looks like being sure this is real before we make it complicated. His thumb moved gently across my knuckles. Right looks like not rushing something that feels important. And this feels important? This feels like it could change everything. The honesty in his voice took my breath away. Because he was right, this did feel like it could change everything. The careful solitude I'd built, the protective distance I'd maintained from anything that might ask too much of me, the quiet life I'd constructed that was safe precisely because it demanded nothing and promised nothing. All of it felt suddenly fragile in the face of whatever was building between us. I'm scared too, I admitted. Of what? Of wanting this too much, of letting you matter and then having you leave, of I stopped, trying to find words for something I'd never had to articulate before. Of being seen by someone and having them decide I'm not worth staying for. Marcus? Eli's voice was so gentle, it almost broke something in me. Look at me. I turned to face him, and even in the darkness, I could see something fierce and certain in his expression. I don't know what's going to happen, he said. I don't know if this is going to work out or if we're going to mess it up or if we're both crazy for feeling this much this fast. But I know that right now, in this moment, I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else or with anyone else. And I know that whatever happens next, I'm not going to walk away because I decide you're not worth it. How can you know that? Because I've spent the last 24 hours watching you be exactly who you are. No performance, no pretense, just you. And everything I've seen makes me want to see more. I felt something crack open in my chest, some careful seal I'd maintained around my heart suddenly giving way. Eli, I know it's scary. It's scary for me too. But maybe that's how you know it matters. He was still holding my hand, his fingers warm and steady against mine, and I found myself thinking about trust. How it wasn't something you decided to do, but something you discovered you were already doing. How I'd spent months protecting myself from exactly this kind of vulnerability, and here I was, hand in hand with someone I'd known for less than 2 days, feeling safer than I had in years. Stay tonight, I said, the words coming out before I could second guess them. Marcus? Not like that. I don't want this day to end yet. And you said you sleep better here than at home. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel him considering it, weighing whatever internal calculation told him whether this was wise or reckless or somewhere in between. Okay, he said finally, if you're sure, I'm sure. So we stayed there on the couch, hands linked, listening to the music play softly from his phone, until the battery finally died and left us in the gentle silence of the apartment. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to find Eli carefully extracting his hand from mine. Sorry, he whispered. Didn't want to wake you, but my arm was falling asleep. What time is it? A little after midnight. I sat up, suddenly aware that we'd spent the entire evening on the couch together, that his staying the night had somehow shifted from suggestion to reality without either of us making a formal decision about it. You can take the bed tonight, I said. I'll sleep out here. Absolutely not. I'm the guest, I get the couch. Eli, you're like 6 feet tall. You won't fit on that couch properly. I'll be fine. I'm not letting you spend a second night folded up like a pretzel on my couch. Take the bed. We went back and forth about it for a few more minutes before finally reaching a compromise. We'd share the bed, both of us fully clothed, both of us on our respective sides, nothing complicated or compromising about it. Just two people sleeping in the same space because it felt better than sleeping apart. It should have been awkward. It should have been charged with tension or expectation or at least some level of self-consciousness. Instead, it felt natural in a way that surprised both of us. Eli borrowed a t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that were too short for him, but serviceable enough for sleeping. I gave him the side of the bed closer to the window, and we settled into the darkness with careful space between us, both of us acutely aware of the other's breathing. Good night, Marcus, Eli said softly. Good night. I lay there listening to him breathe, feeling the warmth of another person in my bed for the first time in longer than I cared to calculate. It was strange and comforting and slightly surreal, like discovering that something you thought would be complicated was actually the most natural thing in the world. I fell asleep to the sound of rain starting up again outside and gentle and steady against the windows, sealing us into another night of unexpected intimacy. When I woke the next morning, Eli was already up, standing by the window, looking out at the gray morning light. He'd put his own clothes back on, and there was something in his posture that suggested he was preparing to leave. Morning, I said, my voice rough with sleep. Morning, I was just. The rain stopped. Yeah. He turned from the window, and I could see something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Not uncertainty exactly, but a kind of careful evaluation, like he was trying to decide something important. I should probably head home, he said. Take care of some things, get some work done. Right, of course. But neither of us moved. We just stood there in my bedroom, looking at each other in the pale morning light, both of us aware that once he left, whatever bubble we'd been existing in for the past day and a half would burst and let the real world back in. This was, Eli started, then stopped, seeming to search for the right words. Yeah, I don't want you to think I make a habit of this, staying over at strangers' apartments, spending entire days with people I barely know. I don't think that. Good, because I don't. This isn't something I do. What is it then? He was quiet for a long moment, looking at me with those storm gray eyes. It's something that happened, something I didn't expect and don't entirely understand, but don't regret. Not even a little?